I should have seen it coming the moment I saw the guest list. But there's something embarrassingly hopeful about birthdays, isn't there? Especially when you grow up craving that warmth that everyone else takes for granted. Your name on a cake, someone remembering what you love. I've learned that when you want the smallest thing, you become the easiest target. My name is Marlo Hart. I'm 28 years old, and up until the day of my own birthday party, I thought maybe, just maybe, my family had finally learned how to love me back. I arrived at the Windermere Estate in Yorkshire with trembling hands. The car I rented was too modest for the driveway. The hedge maze, the marble lions flanking the steps, the strings of fairy lights flickering in the dusk. It all felt like something from a life that might have been mine if I hadn't always been the afterthought, the mistake. But this time they said, asterisk, it's your day, Marlo. We want to do it right. So when I stepped out of the car, I looked for my mother first. She'd been the one who made the call. I could still hear her voice, unnaturally sweet. Asterisk. You'll come, won't you? Don't make us look bad, darling. Asterisk. The door wasn't open for me. No one was waiting at the top of the steps. I could hear the low hum of music and laughter through the thick glass. It was my birthday. My name on the invitation. My idea, if you believed the lies they'd posted online, acting like this was something they'd planned for me out of the goodness of their hearts. I knocked once. Then again. The door rattled against my knuckles but didn't swing open. Hey! My bag slipped down my shoulder. I shifted it back up and turned around, scanning the drive. Maybe someone was coming. Maybe a cousin who didn't hate me yet. Maybe my mother would appear, arms wide, and say, asterisk. There you are, Marlo. Come inside. Asterisk. Instead, I caught the eye of the event planner. Or at least I think he was. A man in a black suit, holding a clipboard, talking into a radio clipped to his collar. When he looked at me, it was with the vague distaste you'd give to an uninvited guest. He didn't even nod at me. He spoke into his mic and walked away. The wind on the drive was colder than I'd expected for April. I thought about going back to my car, but the whole point was that this year was supposed to be different, so I texted my mother, greater than me, asterisk. I'm here. Doors locked? Greater than mum, asterisk. Darling, just wait outside a sec. You know how it is, things to set up. Don't be difficult. Don't be difficult. If I'd had £1 for every time she'd said that, I wouldn't have needed to build my own life from scratch. Minutes ticked by. The sun dipped lower behind the hedges. I watched my reflection in the glass. My hair neat, my dress pressed, my cheap shoes already pinching my toes. When a pair of distant cousins arrived, flushed with drink, draped in cashmere, I stepped forward, ready to slip in behind them. The man with the clipboard stopped me. He pressed a flat palm to my shoulder and said, Sorry, ma'am, I've been told to keep you outside for now. I could see my name, Hart Family Celebrates Marlo, written in the gold script on the sign beside the door. A picture of me, the one from the charity gala where they hadn't invited me until the last minute, but they'd still used my photo for PR. My own birthday party, and I was a stranger at the gate. I stepped back. The laughter inside grew louder, shrill, bright, the sound of glasses clinking together like 1,000 tiny knives. I wondered what they were saying about me. Maybe they'd written some little speech to make themselves look generous. Maybe they were telling my story the way they always did, turning my resilience into their bragging rights. I could feel the anger simmer under my skin. I forced it down. I'd promised myself I wouldn't make a scene this time. My phone buzzed again. Greater than mum. Asterisk. Smile, darling. Guests will see you. You don't want them to think you're sulking. I wanted to laugh, but the lump in my throat made it impossible. I pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders and stepped to the side, trying to look casual, like I'd chosen to be out here, hugging myself against the cold while my so-called family toasted my existence without me. That's when I noticed the car pulling up by the gates. Sleek, black, a model I didn't recognize, clearly not one of the other guests. The tinted window rolled down just enough for a pair of eyes to find mine. It was Lane, my driver. but he wasn't supposed to be here yet. I'd told him to come for me after midnight, when I'd had enough pretending. He stepped out and didn't bother to hide the way he looked me up and down, assessing, protective. Lane was the only person I trusted with my real life. The only one who knew about the company, the bank accounts, the jet. I kept hidden like an ace up my sleeve. He didn't say anything at first, just scanned the estate behind me, then leaned in close. "Ma'am," he said, voice low enough for only me to hear. "You want me to shut this down?" I shook my head. "Not yet." He looked at the line of cars parked along the drive, the expensive coats, the laughter spilling through the cracks in the doors. He looked at me, my thin coat, my trembling hands, and then back at the estate. "Give the word," he said. "They keep you out here one more minute. I'll make the call." I didn't ask who he'd call. I didn't have to. Lane knew every number that mattered. He knew the pilots, the staff waiting at the private hangar, not 10 miles from here. He knew I didn't have to stand on this driveway, like a forgotten child. But something in me wanted to see how far they'd take it. How long they'd make me wait before they'd remember I was the reason they could brag about a daughter at all. 5 more minutes passed. Then, 10. Lane stood by the car, hands folded, every inch the quiet threat I'd built my real life on. I could see him glancing at his watch, at me, then back at the door like he was measuring the patience I'd already run dry. Inside, the music changed. An upbeat, triumphant anthem that must have sounded sweet to the people who'd stolen my day. I wondered if they'd do the toast now, lift their glasses to my name while I stood outside in the cold. I checked my phone again. Nothing. No apology. No explanation. Not even from my mother, who'd built her whole image on pretending she cared. I looked at Lane. He raised an eyebrow. "Call them," I said, voice sharper than I meant it to be. "Get the jet ready." He didn't ask if I was sure. He just nodded once, then slipped back into the car, talking into his phone, making the arrangements I'd spent years putting into place. The first roar of the engines came 15 minutes later. So faint at first, I thought I'd imagined it. Then louder, the hum of turbines cutting through the quiet countryside. My mother's party would hear it too. I wondered if they'd look up from their glasses of champagne. If they'd realize that the girl they'd left on the doorstep wasn't the girl they thought they owned anymore. The sky above the hedge maze split open with the white lights of my jet circling the private airstrip next door. The ground seemed to hum beneath my feet. Lane stepped out of the car, phone pressed to his ear, eyes on me. "Ready?" he asked. I took one last look at the grand entrance of the Windermere estate, the place where they'd locked me out of my own life, over and over again. I could see my mother's silhouette in the window now, leaning forward, straining to see what the noise was. I smiled. For the first time that night, it wasn't forced. "Let's go," I said. I stepped into the car as the engines roared closer, the promise of my own sky waiting for me just beyond the hedges they'd built to keep me out. And in that moment, standing outside my own party, I knew, the only thing better than being invited in is not needing the invitation at all. The only thing better than being invited in is not needing the invitation at all. I held onto that thought like a lifeline as Lane's car rolled down the winding driveway. The laughter and music faded behind me, swallowed up by the hedges that had hidden so many secrets over the years. My hands were still trembling, but the tremble wasn't from fear anymore. It was from the raw pulse of freedom pounding in my veins. The private strip wasn't far, just 10 miles of empty country lanes, high hedges, and old stone walls that had once felt like a prison. Now they felt like the boundary line between the life they'd written for me and the life I'd carved out for myself. Lane drove like he always did, smooth, no wasted motion. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror every few seconds, like he was expecting my mother to come tearing down the road behind us. But she wouldn't. Not her. She'd be too busy spinning some story about how I'd overreacted or ruined everything again. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the window and let the streetlights smear into gold streaks. My phone buzzed again. A string of messages. First, my mother. Greater than mum. Asterisk. Where did you go? Don't do this to me. Greater than mum. Asterisk. I told you to wait. You always do this. Greater than mum. Asterisk. Don't embarrass me. greater than mum, asterisk. Come back. Now. I snorted under my breath. The audacity of it almost made me laugh. Don't embarrass me. Like I hadn't spent every birthday, every holiday, every milestone sitting at the kids' table, or in the hallway, or left off the list altogether when she needed to look perfect for her friends. Lane must have heard me scoff. You want me to block her? He asked, eyes still on the road. I thought about it. But no, I wanted her to see this. To see what happened when you shut your own daughter out one too many times. Let her keep texting, I said. She'll figure it out soon enough. He gave a small, satisfied grunt. Jet's ready. They'll hold until you're on board. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing in the hum of the car, the smell of the leather seats, the faint whiff of rain that had started to mist the windshield. I didn't want to look too far ahead yet. I just wanted to feel this moment. This split second where the doors slammed shut behind me, and the future cracked wide open like a sunrise. The runway came into view in the distance, floodlights cutting through the dark, the hangar's wide mouth open, waiting to swallow me whole and spit me back out at 30,000 feet. My jet sat there like a promise, sleek, silver, humming with quiet power. I'd bought it in secret years ago, not as some petty symbol of wealth, but as a reminder to myself. I could always leave. I was never trapped again. The girl they'd made to feel small enough to disappear could soar above every hedge, every locked door, every whisper behind her back. Lane pulled up to the hangar entrance and got out before I could. He opened my door like he always did, but tonight there was something different in his eyes, something that looked an awful lot like pride. You ready for this? He asked. I stepped out, the wind whipping at the hem of my dress, my coat flaring behind me like wings. I could see my pilot at the foot of the steps, cap in hand, eyes respectfully downcast until I approached. I've been ready for years, I said. Lane fell in step beside me as I walked to the steps. I could feel the engines vibrating through the tarmac. The hum was like a heartbeat. Mine. The pilot greeted me with a small bow of his head. Miss Hart, welcome back. Destination? I looked at Lane. We hadn't even discussed it yet. That was the thing about freedom. You didn't need a plan. You just needed the courage to leave. New York, I said, the words slipping out before I'd fully thought it through. And then we'll see. Very good, ma'am, the pilot said, stepping aside. Lane handed me my overnight bag. I could see the tiny leather tag with my initials embossed in gold. I'm sighed. Funny how a small thing like that could make you feel real again. Like you owned your name, your story. I paused at the steps and turned back. Lane was standing there, arms folded, the same immovable guardian he'd always been. You coming with me? I asked. He gave me a half smile. You tell me, want me on your wing? I wanted to say always, but I didn't have to. Lane already knew. He followed me up the steps, and the hatch sealed shut behind us with a hiss that sounded like the final exhale of the old life I'd just buried. Inside, the cabin was warm, soft cream leather seats, golden lights, a tray of chilled water and fresh fruit waiting at the side. I sank into my favorite seat by the window and watched the ground crew scurry below like ants. Lane sat across from me, his phone already buzzing with updates. He'd be making calls all night, arranging meetings, shifting my schedule, letting the right people know I was back in play. Because that's what I'd built. This empire that no one in my family even knew about. They thought I was the embarrassment, the drifting daughter with nothing to show for herself. They didn't know I'd built investment funds under shell companies, bought out properties they couldn't afford, and quietly leveraged their debts until they owed me more than they'd ever know. They wouldn't understand that the little girl they'd made to stand in the rain was the woman with the power to make them kneel. I watched the ground slip away as the engines roared louder, the runway lights streaking into blur. We lifted into the dark, the estate a forgotten speck somewhere beneath the clouds. Lane's voice cut through my thoughts. You want to send her a message? I almost said no, but then I pictured my mother's face when the guests realized I wasn't coming back. When she'd have to spin some lie about why the birthday girl had vanished. Yeah, I said. One line. He raised an eyebrow, waiting. Thanks for the party, I said, but I had better places to be. Lane's grin was quick and sharp. He typed it and sent it off, and I imagined my mother reading it with her perfectly manicured fingers trembling around her glass of overpriced champagne. The jet climbed higher. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes. I could almost hear my father's voice in my head. Asterisk. You'll never make it on your own, Marlo. You're too soft. You're too much like your mother. Asterisk. Well, they were both wrong. A soft chime signaled that we'd hit cruising altitude. Lane leaned forward, his expression softer than I'd seen it in years. Where to after New York? I opened my eyes, looking out the window at the endless stretch of stars. I'd spent so long looking up at them, wondering if I'd ever reach high enough to touch them. Wherever I feel like, I said. I think it's time they all learned what that means. I knew the real work was ahead. Money wasn't protection. Not really. It just bought me space, time, and the tools to fight back. But power? Power was when you didn't have to knock anymore. When you built the door yourself. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me. Another message from my mother. I didn't even bother to read it. I turned the phone off, pressed it into the pocket of my bag, and looked back out at the sky. Below me, the world was a mess of old grudges and fresh wounds. But up here? Up here, it was mine. The flight attendant came by, offering me a warm blanket and tea. Lane leaned back, eyes half shut, his phone still buzzing every few seconds with people wanting answers. I pulled the blanket around my shoulders and let the hum of the engines lull me into something like peace. My mind raced ahead. New York, the meetings I'd postponed, the deals I could close with a single word. And of course, the inevitable fallout when my family realized who really paid the mortgage on their precious Windermere estate. That was the next part. That was the part I'd been waiting for. The day they'd stand at my door instead, desperate, smiling too wide, asking for my generosity. And I'd get to decide whether to open it. Somewhere over the Atlantic, the clouds swallowed the stars, and the jet rocked gently through pockets of turbulence. But I didn't mind. I'd learned to ride it out, to keep my seatbelt fastened, my eyes on the horizon. Lane's voice broke the quiet. They're gonna come for you now, you know. Beg, threaten, whatever it takes. I turned my head, meeting his steady gaze. Good, let them knock. The turbulence smoothed out. The hum of the engine settled into something steady and comforting. I pressed my palm to the window, the cold glass grounding me in the here and now. I thought of my mother's face again, the last glimpse I'd had of her behind that window, watching me leave. Powerless for the first time in her carefully curated life, somewhere deep in my chest, a tiny flame of satisfaction flickered to life. It wasn't revenge. Not really. It was something better. It was the knowledge that when they finally decided to come outside looking for me, I wouldn't be waiting on the doorstep. I'd be gone, miles above them, charting my own course through the storm. And if they wanted to follow me, they'd have to learn how to fly. They'd have to learn how to fly. We flew through the night, over the Atlantic, where the stars faded behind a stubborn layer of storm clouds. Where the darkness pressed so close to the windows, I felt like I could reach out and let it swallow me whole, but it didn't scare me. Not anymore. Not when I'd already faced something so much worse. The feeling of standing outside your own life while everyone inside laughs without you. I don't know how long I sat there staring at the darkness. Lane must have fallen asleep at some point, or pretended to. His head rested back against the cream leather seat, his phone balanced loosely on his chest. Even asleep, he looked like he could snap awake and handle anything for me. I watched him for a moment. I wondered if he remembered the first time we'd met. I did. I'd been 22, raw and terrified, standing in the lobby of a faceless glass office tower in London. Back then, Lane had been just another name on the list, a driver, discreet, reliable. But when my mother's lawyers had tried to corner me in a boardroom, when my father's old partners tried to strip me of everything I'd built before I'd even built it, Lane had stepped between me and the wolves. That's how you know who's real. When they stand between you and the wolves with nothing to gain. I'd learned that lesson late. Too late, maybe. But I'd learned it well enough to never let anyone else stand between me and my own worth again. The plane rocked gently as the pilots adjusted altitude, skirting a weather front. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the last time I'd slept for more than an hour at a time. Even now, miles above the ocean, I felt the thrum of my pulse in my throat, 1,000 thoughts vying for space. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed I was back at the Windermere gates, the iron bars taller than me, slick with rain. I dreamed my mother's voice. "Don't be difficult, Marlowe." I dreamed the sound of laughter, champagne glasses clinking, and the heavy lock sliding into place behind me. And then I dreamed of wings. Huge, steel wings tearing those gates from their hinges, lifting me into the night sky while the party below turned to static. I woke up with a start. Lane's eyes were open now, one brow raised at me like he'd been watching the whole time. "Bad dream?" he asked, voice rough from sleep. I stretched, forcing the cold from my limbs. "Not bad, just old." He studied me, then reached over and handed me a cup of steaming tea. I hadn't even heard the attendant come by. That was Lane, always seeing the cracks I tried to hide. "ETA is 2 hours," he said. "We'll hit JFK just before dawn." I sipped the tea. It scalded my tongue but woke up the part of me that had gone numb in the clouds. "Anyone waiting?" He tapped his phone. "Couple of meetings confirmed already. The Midtown office is prepped. Your lawyer's pulling the files on the Windermere Trust." I almost laughed at that. The trust. The thing my parents bragged about at parties, pretending it was some grand sacrifice for my future. As if they hadn't drained it for years, plugging the holes in their own egos. "Good," I said. "I want them to feel the pinch." Lane gave me a rare grin. "They're gonna feel more than that." We settled into silence again. I thought of the messages my mother must still be sending, the voicemails stacking up. I pictured her frantic pacing in the drawing room, the clink of ice in her glass as she poured another gin and tonic to steady her hands. I pictured my father, or what was left of him, the memory of him, shaking his head in disappointment from whatever place cowards go when they run out of excuses. They told me I was the ungrateful one, the troublemaker, the difficult child. They'd never said the word Nottstotter without that catch in their throats. That unspoken, but that made me feel like an unwelcome guest in my own bloodline. But now? Now they'd learn what happens when the difficult one gets rich. Really rich. Not just the flash in the pan, borrowed from daddy rich. The kind of wealth you dig out with your bare hands, bleeding at the knuckles, until you can buy the house next door just to slam the door in their faces. The jet banked slightly. A streak of purple dawn cracked through the clouds. New York glowed beneath us. A lattice of gold and silver and neon, pulsing like a heartbeat I hadn't heard in years. "Miss Hart?" The flight attendant's voice startled me. She stood at my elbow, eyes soft but steady. "We'll be landing in 20 minutes. Is there anything you'd like before we touch down?" I looked at her. Young, polite, doing her job without prying. I wondered what she'd think if she knew that the girl with her name on the tail of this jet had once slept in her car because she was too ashamed to ask for help. "Just tell the pilots thanks," I said, "for flying through that storm." She smiled. "They said they'd fly through worse for you." I watched her walk back down the aisle. For a second, I let the warmth of it sink in. The idea that I could inspire that kind of loyalty, not through fear or debt, but through something real. I turned back to Lane. "How long do you think they'll wait before they reach out?" Lane stretched his long legs out, arms crossed. "They'll spin their PR for a week. Maybe 2. Make it look like you flaked out. Ungrateful child, humiliating the family. But once the creditors come knocking, once they see you hold the note on half their properties, He trailed off, a wicked little grin on his face. I matched it. Let's make them sweat. Dash 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 dot dot. We touched down just as dawn broke over Manhattan. The skyline looked like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. But I liked that about New York. It never pretended to love you. It just dared you to survive. A black car waited at the foot of the steps. Not the old rental junkers I used to take when I first came here, hiding from the family's spies. This one had my crest on the plates. A small, discreet logo only Lane and I knew how to read. As the driver loaded my bag into the trunk, I stood at the edge of the tarmac and let the cold wind slap me fully awake. The city smelled like wet concrete, coffee, and gasoline. I breathed it in like a promise. Lane checked his phone. Your lawyer's already at the office, wants to run you through the numbers. And there's a breakfast meeting with the Harper Foundation. They're curious about your next move. I laughed, a short bark that tasted like freedom. Let them guess. We climbed into the car. The city swallowed us whole. Towering glass, grimy alleys, people moving with that determined New York speed that always made my heart race. I let my eyes drift over the familiar landmarks. The river, the old brick buildings near Soho, the bridge that looked so delicate from here. I'd made deals in those buildings. Signed papers that gave me the power to pull the strings behind curtains they didn't even know existed. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't my mother. It was the charity director at the Windermere Children's Trust, one of the many public faces my parents used to launder their reputation. Greater than asterisk, Miss Hart, we heard you were in town. Would love to connect while you're here. Asterisk. I almost told Lane to delete it. But then a thought crawled into my mind like a spark. Lane. The trust. How deep do I have to go to own it outright? He raised an eyebrow. Pretty deep. They've got a lot of shady back channels. You'd have to buy the debt, pay the tax liens, absorb the donor guarantees. I felt the smile stretch slow and wicked across my face. Do it, Lane chuckled. It's gonna make a mess. I leaned back into my seat, watching the skyline slice the sky into shards of glass and steel. Good. Let them know what it feels like to stand outside the gates. Dash, 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 dot, dot. The rest of the day was a blur of marble lobbies, glass elevators, and conference tables that looked like runways in their own right. Lawyers in tailored suits flinched when they saw the documents I laid out. Bankers who'd once snubbed my calls now scrambled to match my terms. One by one, the trust strings untangled in my hands like they'd been waiting for me all along. At one point, Lane leaned in, his breath warm near my ear. You're enjoying this. I didn't deny it. Why shouldn't I? Because revenge gets sloppy. I held his gaze across the gleaming table. This isn't revenge, Lane. This is the bill coming due. Dash, 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 dot, dot. It was late afternoon when we finally stepped back out into the cold Manhattan air. I'd barely slept, but the exhaustion felt clean. Earned. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a video message. I knew before I opened it that it would be my mother. In the clip, she sat in the conservatory at Windermere, wrapped in a cashmere shawl like a queen on her crumbling throne. Asterisk, darling. Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be. Come home. We can work this out. Asterisk. I paused the video and replayed that one word, Tory home. The place I'd never been welcome. The place that locked me out on my birthday while they drank to my name. I deleted it without replying. Lane handed me a folded envelope. Your pilot's on standby. Jet's ready whenever you are. I traced my finger over the flap. And the trust? Yours by midnight. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. For years, that trust had been my mother's excuse. Asterisk. We do it for the children, Marlo. Not everything is about you. Well, now the children would finally see where the money went. And who is holding the keys? I stepped to the curb, the city's roar washing over me like an anthem. I could feel the old fear dissolving in my bloodstream, replaced by something sharper. purpose, power, peace. I didn't know exactly where I'd land next. New York, London, Paris. But one thing was certain. I would never stand shivering at a locked door again. Somewhere behind me, Lane's phone buzzed with another message from Windermere. He didn't show it to me. He just raised his eyes, waiting for my signal. I gave him a nod. Book the meeting. He didn't ask which one. He already knew. The jet engines would roar again tonight, but this time, I wouldn't be leaving empty-handed. I'd be bringing a storm with me. I felt it thrumming through my veins as I stood on the curb outside the Midtown office, the freezing wind slicing through the gaps in my coat. The sun had dipped behind the skyline, setting the windows ablaze with reflections that felt too much like the fires I was ready to light in my own house. Lane was on his phone again, pacing just a few feet away, voice low but sharp as a blade. I watched him from the corner of my eye, that easy, silent power in the way he carried himself. If anyone could smell blood in the water, it was Lane, and he knew exactly how to keep the sharks circling until I gave the word. I turned back to the lobby doors behind me, glass and steel, the Hart & Company crest discreetly etched above the revolving entrance. My father used to brag that his name meant something in this town, that people would stand aside when they saw it on a building. Funny how he never guessed that one day it would be me at the helm, the daughter they'd left out in the cold, now the one with the keys. I slipped back through the doors into the lobby. The security guard at the desk straightened up the moment he saw me. No hesitation now. No polite brush-offs or side glances. They knew whose shadow they were standing in. "Miss Hart, they're waiting for you on 34, he said, pressing the elevator call button before I could even reach for it. "Thank you," I said, giving him the kind of smile that used to feel fake but now sat easy on my lips. Not all power was about fear. Some of it was about people knowing where they stood, and who'd still be standing when the lights came back on. The elevator chimed open. I stepped in alone. I caught my reflection in the mirrored walls. Hair windblown, eyes a little too bright. There she was, the birthday girl who used to wait at locked doors, now riding 34 stories up to sign away the last scraps of the chains they'd tried to keep me in. My phone buzzed in my hand. Another message, this time from Nia, my lawyer in New York. Greater than Naya, asterisk. Harper Foundation wants you to host the gala instead of your mother. Should I accept? I laughed. A short, sharp sound that bounced off the stainless steel walls. Of course they did. The Harper Foundation wasn't about charity. It was about who got their photo on the front page. And the donors had always liked a pretty tragic story to hang their reputations on. Greater than me, asterisk. Tell them yes. But double the ask. And every penny goes direct to the programs. No more admin fees for Windermere. A minute passed. Greater than Naya. Asterisk. Got it. You're going to make enemies tonight. Greater than me. Asterisk. They made me first. The elevator dinged. 34. I stepped out into the hush of the executive floor. Marble floors, glass partitions, the faint hum of a city that never slept, vibrating through the windows. Nia was waiting for me at the end of the corridor, a stack of documents hugged tight to her chest. She was younger than my last lawyer, but sharper, meaner. That was what I liked about her. She didn't play polite when there was blood to draw. "They're in the boardroom," she said, falling into step beside me. "The trust's trustees. A couple of your mother's old friends. They're trying to stall." "Let them," I said. "They can watch me sign their future away with my own pen." Nia gave me a quick, savage grin. "I ordered champagne." I raised an eyebrow. "For them or for us?" She didn't answer, but the glint in her eye told me enough. Dash, 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 dot dot. The boardroom was a fishbowl of dark wood and high-backed chairs. The men sitting around the table looked like relics. Old suits, older eyes, fingers drumming on leather portfolios, like they still believed they held the power. At the head of the table was Graham Hawthorne, trustee, family friend, and the man who'd once told me when I was 15 that girls like me were best seen, not heard. He rose when I entered, lips pursed in that patronizing smile he'd perfected decades ago. "Marlowe," he said, "didn't expect to see you so soon." I shrugged out of my coat and draped it over the back of the chair, ignoring his outstretched hand. Didn't expect to be here, Graham. But then, life's full of surprises. I sank into the chair opposite him. Nia slipped into the seat at my right, her pen already clicking like a trigger. I understand you want to restructure the Windermere Children's Trust, Graham said, the word rolling off his tongue like a threat. That's a delicate operation. So much history, so many families depending on the money you skim off for management fees? I cut in. Don't worry, Graham. I've had my accountants look under every rock. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. Now, Marlowe. I leaned forward, palms flat on the table. No more now, Marlowe. You don't get to talk down to me anymore. Here's what's going to happen. I'm buying out the debt. Every pound. Every lien. Every hidden little shell company you thought we wouldn't find. And when the ink's dry, the kids actually get the money. Not your country club renovations. The man to Graham's left, a ruddy-faced trustee, whose name I didn't even care to remember, cleared his throat. You can't just come in here and dictate terms. You're still a beneficiary, not an owner. Nia slid a thick stack of papers across the table. Not after tonight. Read the clauses. She's the sole creditor now. That makes her the trust's majority holder by default. Silence. The kind of silence that drips down the walls like oil. Graham leaned back, his eyes flinty. You know your mother will fight you on this. I matched his gaze. She can try, but she'll have to knock on my door this time. A muscle jumped in his jaw. He reached for the papers, flicking through them with the practiced disinterest of a man who knows he's already lost. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Nia leaned closer, her whisper warm against my ear. Ready to sign? I took the pen she held out to me. It was heavier than I expected. Gold, engraved with my initials. I'd forgotten I'd given her that detail when she joined my team. I pressed the tip to the paper. For a moment, my hand hovered. Not with doubt, but with the weight of every birthday I'd spent standing outside locked doors. Every toast made in my name while I shivered in the cold. Every lie they told about who I was and what I'd done. Then I signed. One page, then the next, then the next. By the time I set the pen down, the room felt different. Lighter somehow, even with the storm brewing in the old men's eyes. Graham closed the folder with a snap. You think this makes you untouchable? No, I said. It makes me uninvited. .. When I stepped back into the corridor, Lane was waiting, arms folded. That small, rare smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Done? He asked. I nodded. Done. Nia handed me a glass of champagne. I took it, feeling the bubbles fizz on my tongue like electricity. Lane lifted his phone. Your mother's called 4 times. She knows. Good, I said. Let her know I'll be in London tomorrow. He raised an eyebrow. Going back already? I tipped the last of the champagne down my throat and handed him the empty glass. I'm done knocking. Now I'm kicking the doors off the hinges. .. That night, we rode back to the jet. The hangar lights glowed in the dark, my name stenciled discreetly on the side of the plane. The one place my family had never managed to slap their fingerprints on. Lane handed me my travel coat, the thick wool draping across my shoulders like armor. He didn't say anything about the tension in my jaw, the tremor in my fingers. He didn't have to. He knew I'd hold it together until I didn't have to anymore. As the engines roared to life, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't my mother's number. It was a private line, one I hadn't used in years. I answered it without a word. Marlowe. Her voice. Ice wrapped in silk. Mother, I said. How's the party? The line crackled. I could hear the tightness in her breath. Don't do this. Don't humiliate us like this. I leaned back into the leather seat, eyes fixed on the dark runway ahead. I learned from the best. Marlowe, I cut her off. Next time you want me to wait outside, maybe think about what door I'll open instead. Before she could answer, I ended the call. The jet lurched forward, gathering speed. And as we lifted off, as the lights of the Windermere estate shrank to pinpricks behind me, I felt it. That final snap of the chain. The sound of the gates falling off their rusted hinges. I was flying now. And this time no one would ever land me against my will again. That word stuck with me as the jet cut through the clouds, leaving New York's shimmering skyline behind like the last trace of an old scar. I sat alone by the window, my reflection split into fragments by the cabin's soft golden lights. Lane was somewhere behind the partition, making calls, tying up threads, stitching shut the holes my mother's lawyers would try to pry open the moment we landed back on British soil. My phone was off. It needed to be, because if I heard her voice one more time, that syrupy calm she'd mastered so well, I'd do something I'd regret. Not for her, but for me. I'd spent enough years cracking under her version of love. I was done letting my ribs bruise every time she leaned in for a hug lined with barbed wire. The hum of the engine soothed me in a way I couldn't explain. The last time I'd been in this seat, I was the girl standing outside her own party. Now I was the woman flying back to the house that never let me through its doors. And this time, the keys were mine. Maybe not to the house itself, not yet, but the trust, the foundation, the strings that made their shiny gates swing open. Those were mine now, and they could slam them shut all they wanted. I'd just buy the land underneath. I didn't sleep. I didn't even close my eyes. I watched the moon drift past the small oval window, my pulse a steady drumbeat against my neck. I replayed every word from the last call. My mother's gasp when she realized the paper shield she'd hidden behind was gone. The way she tried to pull me back into her story with that one word, Maris's Sard. There was no us, there was me. And the ones I chose. I pressed my fingertips to the window's cold glass. I could see my reflection now, the faint outline of the girl who used to stand outside and wait. She looked different this time. Her mouth didn't tremble, her eyes didn't dart sideways, searching for a face that would tell her she belonged. She didn't belong. She owned. ... We landed in London just before dawn, the sky a heavy, bruised purple that hadn't decided yet whether to storm or break open into gold. I loved the city at this hour. The hush of the streets, the sleepy gleam of car headlights, the world not quite awake enough to mask its secrets. If you ever want to see the truth of a place, look at it when everyone else is asleep. Lane was at my side before the jet stairs even touched the tarmac. He looked like he hadn't slept either. Tie loose, eyes rimmed red but focused as ever. He handed me my coat without a word. I liked that about him. He knew when to fill the silence and when to guard it. "You want to hit the hotel first?" he asked, voice low. I slipped my arms into the sleeves. The wool settled around me like a shield. "No, straight to Windermere." He paused, phone hovering near his ear. "They won't let you in." I gave him a smile that felt like teeth. "They won't have a choice. ... The drive up to the estate was the same as it had always been. Winding lanes bordered by ancient hedgerows, the kind that looked like they'd been planted to keep people like me out. Trees loomed overhead, their branches like bony hands scratching at the early dawn. Every bend in the road brought back flashes. 8-year-old me counting stones in the driveway while the party roared inside. 15-year-old me pressing a tissue to a split lip, pretending I'd fallen on the gravel instead of tripping over my father's temper. 22 showing up with a smile and leaving in the back of a taxi before dessert. But this time, my car was the only one that mattered. No line of black SUVs ahead of me. No fussy valets asking me to park round back. Just Lane's steady hands on the wheel, the low hum of the engine, and the papers in my bag that would crack open every door they'd locked for decades. We crested the last hill. There it was, Windermere Estate. It looked the same as always. Grand, ivy-draped, its windows glinting in the half-light like watchful eyes. But now I could see the cracks, the crumbling stone along the back wing, the roof tiles that had started to slide, the weeds pushing through the perfect gravel paths. It was all surface. Just like them. Pretty if you didn't look too close. Rotting if you did. Lane stopped just outside the gates. A guard. New, young, wearing a crisp uniform that looked a size too big, stepped out of the booth. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice steady, but his eyes flicking between Lane's broad shoulders and my face. Lane rolled down his window just enough for the boy to catch the cold edge in his smile. "Open the gate." "I'm sorry, I can't." I leaned forward so the guard could see me clearly. "My name is Marlo Hart." Recognition flickered. Then the panic. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Miss Hart, I don't have you on the list for—" "No list," I said. "You know what happens if you don't open it?" He didn't, but he nodded anyway. The gate clicked open a second later. As we drove through, I watched him shrink in the rearview mirror. Another stone turned over. Dash, dash, dash. Inside, the house was already awake. Staff in pressed uniforms bustled through the foyer, whispering into earpieces. My mother was throwing a charity breakfast. Of course she was. A staged photo op. A fresh smear of gold leaf over a rotting core. Nothing new. I stepped out of the car before Lane could open my door. My heels sank into the gravel. I half expected the stones to swallow me whole. A part of me, still 13 years old, convinced I'd dissolve if I stepped too close to the big oak doors. But I didn't. I just walked. At the door, a maid I barely recognized tried to stop me. She pressed her palms together like a prayer. "Miss Hart, please," your mother asked. "I know what she asked," I said. "She can ask me herself." Inside, the drawing room smelled like fresh pastries and roses. The guests, a handful of local dignitaries and journalists, froze when they saw me. Like I was a ghost. Maybe I was. My mother was standing near the fireplace, all soft cashmere and pearls, her hair coiled into that perfect chignon she'd worn since I was a child. She turned at the sound of my shoes clicking across the marble floor. "Marlo," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, just loud enough for the guests to hear. "Darling, we didn't expect you so early." I stopped in the center of the room. I could feel Lane's presence behind me. A silent wall at my back. "I know you didn't," I said. I let the words hang there, sharp and shiny. I saw the whispers ripple through the crowd like a snake in the grass. My mother stepped forward. Her smile stretched so tight I could see it crack at the corners. "Why don't we talk in private?" "Why?" I asked, my voice calm, almost gentle. "So you can tell them some story later? So you can say I stormed in and ruined your party?" A flush rose on her neck. She tried to hide it by touching her pearls. "Marlo, please." I reached into my bag, pulled out the thick folder, the one with the trust papers, the deeds, the bank guarantees. I laid it on the silver tray beside the coffee urn. "You want to tell them the truth?" I said. "Tell them about this. Tell them who pays for the roses and the fresh croissants. Tell them whose money you're using to polish the cracks in your perfect little life." She didn't move. Didn't breathe. For a moment, the room was so quiet I could hear my own heart pounding. I turned to the guests. Strangers, mostly. People who'd worn my family's name like a badge for decades. I met every single pair of eyes. "My name is Marlo Hart," I said. "And this house? This party? This entire show? It runs on my trust now. So if you're here for charity, stay. If you're here for her, leave your check at the door." One woman, older, the kind who loved gossip more than the scones she was pretending to eat, set her plate down and edged toward the door. The ripple spread. I didn't flinch. Let them go. My mother's mask slipped for just a breath. "You think you can embarrass me? In my own home?" I stepped closer, my voice dropping so only she could hear it. "I think you forgot whose name is on the papers. Next time you lock me out, make sure the ground you're standing on isn't mine. Dash, 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 dot, dot." I left the drawing room to the low hum of scandal and the echo of Lane's footsteps behind me. Outside, the sky had finally cracked open. Rain drizzled down the hedges that had once felt like prison walls. They looked smaller now, like the toy fences around a dollhouse. Lane fell into step beside me as we walked back down the long drive. He didn't speak until we reached the car. "Subtle," he said, his voice dry as gravel. I barked a laugh that surprised even me. They taught me well. He opened the door for me. As I climbed in, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. The girl who used to wait outside was gone, and in her place, me, .. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Asterisk. Lane closed the car door behind me, but I didn't tell him to drive yet. Instead, I sat there in the back seat, rain streaking down the window like tears I'd already outgrown. The driveway of Windermere stretched behind us, gravel, old hedgerows, the ghosts of every version of me that had ever stood here wondering when I'd be let in. Now they'd seen it. The woman I'd become, the one who didn't knock anymore. She walked straight through and named her price. Lane slipped into the front seat, the leather creaking under his weight. He glanced at me in the mirror, but didn't speak. He didn't have to. The silence between us had always been my favorite kind. He knew when to ask, and he knew when to wait. I pressed my palm to the glass, watching the old manor grow smaller, edges blurred by the rain. A part of me wanted to roll the window down and let the wind whip through my hair, like some girl in a movie, reckless, wild, free. But I wasn't reckless, not anymore. Every step had been planned, every fight earned. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I felt it before I heard it. I knew who it was. My mother. Or worse, some cousin I hadn't heard from in years, ready to beg for a slice of the trust now that the purse strings were in my hands. I let it buzz. When the screen went dark again, I leaned back into the seat and said, "Drive." Lane pulled the car into gear, his big hands steady on the wheel. The gates swung open for us. Slower than they should have, like the old iron was as tired of holding me out as I was of waiting. The road away from Windermere was the same one I'd taken 1,000 times before, in taxis, on foot, once even barefoot when I'd run all the way to the village after my father called me an embarrassment in front of his colleagues. But now I left in a car that was mine, paid for by money I'd earned, not begged for, protected by a man who'd never once asked me to shrink. I watched the trees slip past, their branches clawing at the sky. Spring had come early this year, but the hedgerows still looked dead, brown and brittle. I wondered if they'd bloom this summer, or if they'd finally wither for good, roots rotting like the lies they'd been planted to hide. .. We didn't head back to the city right away. Lane knew me too well for that. He turned off the main road a few miles outside the estate, guiding us down a narrow lane that cut through the misty fields like a secret. At the end of it sat the old brick house, my house. Mine, not theirs. I'd bought it 5 years ago. Quietly, through an agent. It wasn't grand like Windermere. No marble lions at the gates, no oil portraits of dead relatives watching from the walls. Just red brick, a slate roof, a garden full of wildflowers I never had time to tend. But it was the first place I'd ever stepped inside and thought, sheesh, I can breathe here. No locked doors. No lists to keep my name off. Lane parked by the side gate, engine idling. He didn't move to get out until I did, and even then he waited for my nod. I liked that about him too. He never assumed I needed saving. He just stayed close enough that I didn't have to ask. I stepped out into the drizzle. The air smelled like wet earth, lavender, and the faint tang of wood smoke from the old chimney. I let the rain soak the collar of my coat as I walked up the garden path. The door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, the warmth wrapped around me like a promise. Lane followed me in, shaking the rain from his hair. "You want coffee?" he asked, heading for the tiny kitchen without waiting for an answer. Of course I did. I always did. I wandered through the small sitting room, trailing my fingertips along the back of the old leather sofa. The bookshelves were stuffed with novels I hadn't opened in months. A few framed photos propped between them. None of my parents. None of Windermere. Just me, Lane, and a few snapshots from cities where no one knew my name. On the mantel, a tiny wooden box. I picked it up, thumb brushing the smooth lid. Inside were scraps I'd collected over the years. A clipping of the first check I'd ever signed with my company's name. A cocktail napkin from the night Lane and I had closed our biggest deal. A silver key, the original key to Windermere's front door, slipped into my coat pocket by my father when I was 14, then taken back the next morning after my mother caught him being soft. I snapped the lid shut. Not today, not yet. ... Lane appeared at my shoulder, 2 mugs in hand. He set mine on the coffee table without fuss and took his usual spot in the battered armchair by the window. For a while, we didn't say a word. The rain drummed soft patterns on the roof. The radiator hissed and clanked like an old friend. When I finally spoke, my voice surprised me, too calm for the weight of what was waiting on my tongue. "They're going to come for me." Lane sipped his coffee unbothered. "They already are." I tilted my head, waiting. He pulled out his phone, flicked his thumb across the screen and handed it to me. A string of emails. Some from my mother's personal lawyer, thinly veiled threats dressed up as invitations to discuss the situation like family. Others from the trustees I'd embarrassed, suddenly remembering charitable causes they'd forgotten for years. And one from a name that made my stomach clench. Andrew. My cousin, the golden boy. "Cousin," I said, spitting the word out like poison. He never once called me unless he wanted something. Lane nodded. "Now he wants the trust back." I read the email out loud, tasting every smug word. Greater than asterisk. "Marlo, you've made your point. We both know you don't want this kind of attention. Let's sit down, figure out a way to make this clean. I'll handle the press. You get your piece, and you stay out of the family business." Asterisk. I laughed. Sharp. Humorless. My piece. He still thinks I want scraps. Lane watched me over the rim of his mug. "You want me to handle him?" I shook my head. "No. Not yet. Let him sweat." I tossed the phone onto the table, the screen cracking the silence like a gunshot. I could almost see Andrew now, sitting in his office, hair perfectly slicked back, tie knotted just so, thinking his smile could still talk me out of my spine. He'd been my mother's favorite, the good one, the boy who never asked why the doors were locked when I was on the other side. But this wasn't a conversation anymore. This was a reckoning. ... By noon, the rain had stopped. The clouds broke apart like the old hedges, brittle and fading. Lane and I sat in the kitchen, the remains of lunch between us. Half a loaf of sourdough, some cheese, 2 mugs of tea gone cold. He drummed his fingers on the table, that subtle sign that his mind was already 10 steps ahead. "They'll call a meeting," he said. "Try to corner you, get you to sign it back." I traced the edge of my plate with one finger. "They won't expect me to come." "You will?" I met his eyes. Calm, steel blue, a mirror to my own resolve. "I want to see their faces." Lane's mouth twitched into that rare half-smile. "Where?" "Here," I said, the word tasting like thunder on my tongue. "They locked me out once. Now they can knock on my door. ... We spent the rest of the day making calls. Not to them. Not yet. To my people. The real ones. The charity directors who'd stuck by me when the family tried to freeze me out. The lawyers who'd never folded when the old guard threatened to blacklist them. The board members who'd watched my father siphon millions for his vanity projects and said nothing. Until now, one by one, Lane looped them in. The plan wasn't just to hold the trust. It was to gut it. Rebuild it. Make it clean. So clean that every secret my family had buried there would come crawling into the daylight like worms in the garden soil. Every management fee. Every consultancy retainer. Every backhanded loan. All of it. Out in the open. By the time the sun dipped below the hedgerows again, my phone was buzzing with confirmations. Meetings scheduled. Papers drafted. Whispers already filtering back to Windermere that Marlo Hart wasn't the girl standing outside the party anymore. She was the one setting the guest list. Lane watched me from the doorway as I paced the small sitting room, my voice hoarse from hours of talking but my pulse steady. "You're enjoying this," he said. I turned to him, letting the words settle. "I'm not sure that's the right word." "What would you call it then?" I let my eyes drift back to the old wooden box on the mantel. The broken key inside it. The cocktail napkin. The clipping of my first check. Proof that I'd always known I'd come back for this moment. Even when I was too scared to believe it. I'd call it taking back my name. .. Outside, the wind picked up again, rustling the hedges that had once kept me penned in. This time, they sounded less like chains and more like applause. Tomorrow, they'd come. They'd stand on my doorstep, all forced smiles and poison-tipped compliments, trying to pull me back into their story. But they'd find the locks changed. The ground beneath them mined with truth, and if they wanted to be inside, they'd have to play by my rules. For the first time in years, I slept. Really slept. No dreams of locked gates or champagne laughter behind glass. Just silence. And the hum of the storm waiting for dawn. The hum of the storm waiting for dawn, that was what I woke to the next morning. That quiet electric sense that the air around you has shifted, and there's no going back. I lay still for a while, listening to the faint creak of the old brick house settling around me. The radiator hissed and clicked. The floorboards sighed under Lane's heavy footsteps somewhere down the hall. For a second, I let myself pretend that this was just any other morning, that the people I'd called blood weren't circling like wolves, ready to knock on the door they'd once locked to keep me out. But it wasn't just any other morning. It was the first morning of my choosing. I sat up, feet on the cold wooden floor, my hair a tangled mess around my shoulders. No silk robes, no velvet slippers like my mother loved to parade around in. Just an old sweatshirt and a pair of leggings that had seen too many late nights hunched over my laptop while I built the life they'd sworn I'd never hold together. Downstairs, Lane was at the kitchen counter, scrolling through his phone. A fresh mug of coffee steamed beside him, untouched. He looked up when he heard my steps on the stairs. "Morning, boss," he said, voice low, calm, that tone he used when he knew I was about to crack but wouldn't let myself. "Morning," I croaked, clearing my throat. "Anything?" He turned the screen toward me. An endless scroll of messages, missed calls, press inquiries. One in particular caught my eye. Andrew, cousin Golden Boy. The email was short. No flowery spin this time. Greater than asterisk, coming by at noon. Mother and Uncle Graham too. We need to resolve this. Privately, asterisk. I scoffed. Privately. Of course they do. They're not worried about me. They're worried about the Harper Foundation board seeing their name on the wrong headline. Lane tapped the mug toward me. "Drink. You're sharper when you're not running on fumes." I sank into the chair across from him, the chipped old farmhouse table solid under my elbows. I let the coffee scald my tongue. A burn that made me feel more awake than any sleep ever had. "What do you want me to do?" Lane asked. I thought about that for a moment. There was an old version of me, the polite patient girl, who would have told him to sit this out, who would have handled it alone because asking for help felt like another way to owe someone something. But that girl was gone. "Stay close," I said. "Don't say anything until you have to. But if they try to push back." Lane nodded, one corner of his mouth twitching. "They always underestimate how heavy I hit. .. Noon came like a thunderclap. The sky outside was heavy with the promise of more rain, the hedgerows whipping in the wind that rattled the windows. I stood at the front door, breathing slow, steady, my hands clenched at my sides. I'd asked Lane to unlock the gate. Let them walk right up the path like they owned it. Let them feel the stones under their feet, the same stones I'd counted while waiting for someone to remember I existed. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel first. Then the doors slamming shut. 3 sets, sharp, impatient. I could picture them before I saw them. My mother's heels stabbing into the earth, Andrew's smirk pasted on like a mask, Uncle Graham's hunched shoulders braced for the blow he'd try to deflect. Lane stood a step behind me, a silent wall. He didn't have to say anything. The air between us was thick with the understanding that whatever happened next, we'd own it. A knock. Not soft, not polite. The kind that said, "We're here because we still think you'll open for us." I did. I pulled the door wide, the cold wind swirling in behind them. They looked exactly as I'd pictured. My mother, wrapped in a cream wool coat, pearls at her throat, her hair sprayed into that helmet of careful perfection. Andrew, hair slicked back, tailored suit that screamed money he hadn't earned. And Uncle Graham, pale, his eyes darting behind me like he was checking for an escape route already. "Marlo," my mother said, voice soft but eyes sharp. "May we come in?" I leaned against the doorframe, letting them stand there in the cold for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Just enough for her cheeks to flush, for Andrew's jaw to twitch with that spoiled impatience that always gave him away. "Of course," I said finally. "Come in, wipe your feet." They filed into the sitting room like ghosts. The fireplace was cold. I hadn't bothered to light it. Let them feel the chill. Let them remember that comfort here was something they'd have to earn. My mother perched on the edge of the old sofa, her coat still wrapped tight around her shoulders, like she couldn't stand the idea of leaving a piece of herself behind in this place. Andrew didn't bother to sit. He stood by the mantel, eyes flicking to the photos on the shelves. None of him. None of them. Uncle Graham cleared his throat. "Marlo, we?" "No," I said, cutting him off with a hand. "We're not starting with Marlo. We're starting with you. You can speak when you've got something honest to say." His lips pressed together into a bloodless line. My mother's gaze snapped to Lane, standing by the kitchen doorway, arms folded, expression unreadable. I could see the calculation in her eyes, trying to decide if he was just staff or if he was the gatekeeper she'd have to get through. Andrew spoke first. "This is absurd," he said, voice low but tight. "You made your point. Congratulations. You embarrassed the family. You humiliated your mother in front of donors." I laughed. I couldn't help it. The sound cracked through the room like a whip. "Humiliated? You left me standing outside my own party while you toasted to my generosity. Do you have any idea how many photos I've seen of you raising a glass to my money like it was yours?" His jaw flexed. "We were protecting you." "Don't," I snapped. "Don't stand there and lie to my face in my house." My mother's voice slid in, all velvet and sugar. "Darling, this doesn't have to be so ugly. We can make this right. You're still family. Let's sit down with the lawyers, adjust the arrangement. You get your piece, we keep the trust intact." "There it is again," I said, tasting the word like acid. "My piece. You think you're giving me something that was always mine." She shifted forward, her gloved hands clasping tight. "You're emotional right now. You've always been." Lane's voice cut across the room like a blade. "Careful." My mother flinched. She'd forgotten he was there. Or maybe she'd hoped he'd melt into the walls like everyone else did when she turned on that wounded doe act. I stepped closer, my shadow falling over her where she perched on my sofa like a queen on the wrong throne. "You want to talk about emotional? I spent my whole life waiting for you to open a door that was never locked for you. And now that I own it, you want me to hand you the key back? Tell me why I should." Her mouth worked soundlessly for a moment. Rare for her. She glanced at Andrew. He stepped in like the fixer he always pretended to be. "Marlo, you're not built for this. The trust, the foundation. It's complicated. It's political. Let the family handle it." I took a step so close he had to lean back or feel my breath on his face. "I'm the family now. You want it? You buy it. Full market rate. Cash. No loans from my side accounts. No arrangements. You want it? Pay what it's worth." Graham let out a dry, choking laugh. "That's impossible. No one has that kind of liquidity." I raised my eyebrows. "Then I guess you'd better find a new party to stand outside of. .. They stayed for another hour, voices rising and falling, my mother's fake concern cracking into real anger, Andrew's polished calm unraveling every time I refused to blink first. Lane stood behind me the whole time, silent, watchful. Every time they tried to talk over me, he shifted just enough to remind them whose house they were in. In the end, they left exactly as they'd come, flustered, furious, powerless. My mother paused on the doorstep, the winter wind whipping her hair out of place for the first time I'd ever seen. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her voice low so Lane wouldn't hear. "One day, you'll be outside again, and no one will open the door." I leaned in, my breath fogging the air between us. "That's the difference between you and me, Mother. I don't need anyone to open the door. I built my own." And then I shut it behind them. Dash, 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 dot dot. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Lane made calls, confirming the trust paperwork would hold. I drafted statements for the press. Not gossip, just facts. Let the story bleed on my terms. By dusk, my phone was already buzzing with messages from people who'd once pretended I didn't exist, now eager to know where I'd be donating next. Every knock they'd denied me was just another spotlight now, burning so bright they couldn't look away, and still, behind it all, I felt that old ache. That small, tired part of me that still wondered if maybe, once, they could have loved me the way I'd wanted. Lane caught me staring out the window that night, the gate lights flickering in the drizzle. He came up behind me, his voice low in the hush of the darkened room. "You did good." I didn't answer right away. "I feel empty." "You're not," he said. "You're just clearing space." I turned to him, searching for the lie. But there wasn't one. He'd never fed me false hope. Only the truth. And the truth was this. The door was mine now. And no one could shut me out again. No one could shut me out again. I stood at that window for a long time after Lane left the room, watching the rain dribble down the glass. Outside, the hedgerows shivered in the wind, battered, but unbroken. Like they'd been waiting for years to see me finally turn the lock from the inside. Clearing space. That's what Lane had said. I didn't know if I believed him yet. The emptiness still pressed against my ribs like a bruise I couldn't rub out. Maybe that's what it was to take your name back. You had to tear out the rotten beams first, stand in the hollow place that remained, and hope you were strong enough to build something better. The fireplace cracked and hissed behind me. Lane must have lit it while I was lost in my own head. I turned to the warmth, letting it seep into my bones. This house, my house, felt different now. Not just a hideaway, not just a refuge from the storms that blew in from Windermere. It felt like the foundation for something bigger. I sat on the worn leather sofa, legs tucked under me, phone resting like a loaded gun in my palm. Part of me wanted to shut it off, to savor a single night of silence before the vultures came clawing at my door again. But another part of me, the part that knew there was no going back, needed to look. I unlocked the screen. Hundreds of messages. A handful from the press. The polite ones, the vicious ones, the ones pretending they wanted time's side, when they really wanted blood. I let those pile up. I had no intention of giving them what they wanted. Not yet. Buried under the noise were the ones that mattered. Naya. Greater than asterisk. The Harper Foundation Board just issued a statement. They're with you. They want you to front next quarter's gala. Asterisk. A quick grin tugged at my lips. That was going to sting for Andrew and Mother. Let them choke on it. Another from Grace, the director of the Windermere Trust's local programs. One of the few who'd never kissed my mother's ring. Greater than asterisk. They're scared. We're ready. When you want to sign, the new allocation structure is waiting. Asterisk. Good. Let them feel the ground crack under them for once. Dash 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 dot dot. I must have dozed off there on the sofa. When I woke, the fire had burned low, and the sky outside the window was a pale wash of dawn. My neck ached from the crooked angle, my hands stiff around my phone. For a second, panic bloomed in my chest. That old, familiar terror that I'd let something slip while I slept, that the world had moved without me and I'd be left behind again. But then I saw Lane's coat draped over the arm of the chair across from me. A quiet promise. Nothing happens without me knowing. Nothing happens without you. I stretched my legs out, wincing as blood rushed back into my toes. The air in the room tasted stale, burned wood and old ghosts. I needed to get out. To move. To remind myself that the world outside this house was bigger than the hedgerows I'd fought so long to break through. Dash 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 dot dot. I found Lane in the kitchen, hunched over his phone with a mug of black coffee balanced precariously on a stack of folders. He looked up when he heard me come in, the faintest hint of relief passing over his face. He'd never say it out loud, but I knew. He watched me sleep like a guard dog in a war zone, not because he thought I'd run, but because he knew how easy it was to slip back into the dark if no one was watching. "Morning," he said, pushing the mug toward me. "It's cold. Want a fresh one?" I shook my head, wrapping my hands around the chipped ceramic. "Cold's fine. Reminds me I'm awake." He didn't push. He never did. I sipped the bitter dregs and nodded at the stack of folders. "What's all that?" Lane flipped one open, sliding it across the table so I could see. Bank statements, trust disbursement reports, emails between Graham and the other trustees, marked up with angry red ink. "Nia sent the latest. It's worse than we thought. They've been funneling off more than just admin fees. There's a whole trail of, quote, consulting contracts. Fake shell companies, kickbacks. Some of them go back decades." I traced one of the lines with my fingertip. Windermere Children's Trust, the name that had once been my father's pride, at least in public. Now, just another broken toy in their box of lies. "Can we pin it on them?" I asked. Lane's smile was slow, almost gentle. "Already did. By tomorrow, the new structure's locked. Everything else. The old debts, the hush money, the fake invoices. We expose it all, or they pay you twice to keep it buried." I leaned back, the chair creaking under my weight. "They'll come crawling." He raised an eyebrow. "You want them to?" I thought about that. Really thought about it. The old me would have said yes, would have drunk it in like honey. The sweet taste of my mother on her knees asking for mercy. But the woman sitting here in this kitchen? She was tired of crumbs. I didn't want them crawling. I wanted them gone. "I want it clean," I said. "No more rotten beams under my name. We rebuild it, or we burn it down." Lane's grin was all teeth. "Good. Let's pour the gasoline. Dash, 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 dot, dot." By mid-morning, the calls started. First, Graham. His voice brittle, fake calm, the way it always was when he thought he could bend me if he just stayed reasonable. He asked for a private meeting. Just me and him. "We can resolve this, Marlowe, for the sake of the family's reputation. You're making this bigger than it has to be." I let him talk until the line went quiet. Then I said, "It's already bigger than you think. And your reputation isn't my responsibility anymore." Click. "Next, Andrew." A text this time. All slick backpedaling charm. "Greater than asterisk. We can still fix this. I can get the board to offer you a seat. You keep your face on the gala. We say it was a misunderstanding. Asterisk." I typed my answer so fast my fingers cramped. "Greater than asterisk. I don't want a seat. I own the table. Stay out of my way. Asterisk. Dash, 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 dot, dot." But it was my mother's message that made me pause. She didn't write it herself, of course. She never did when it mattered. She had a lawyer do it. All polite letterhead and heavy paragraphs of legalese about fiduciary duty and misuse of trust resources. The threat underneath was clear. "Take your foot off our neck, or we drag you into court and smear your name until it's ash." I read it twice, then a third time. Each word landed like a pebble dropped in a dry well. Echoing, useless. When Lane saw my face, he didn't even ask. He just reached for the phone. "Want me to handle it?" I shook my head. "Not yet." I opened a fresh email, CC'd Nia and the new directors, and attached every scrap of the trust's dirty laundry we'd uncovered. Greater than asterisk. Release all of it to the press. Every contract, every fake shell, every hidden debt. Let them know the new trust is clean, and who tried to keep it dirty. Asterisk. Lane's grin was all approval. "You're sure?" I pressed send. "If I'm not welcome in their house, they don't get to hide in mine. Dash, 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 dot, dot." By evening, the fallout was everywhere. Financial reporters were crawling over each other for a fresh headline. Windermere Trust Scandal. Family accused of decades of fraud. Local programs saved by whistleblower beneficiary. Marlowe Hart takes full control. I stood in my garden, phone buzzing like a hornet in my pocket, the wind whipping my hair across my face. I could see the glow of Windermere's windows far across the fields, a flicker of gold behind the hedgerows that once swallowed me whole. I wondered if my mother was standing at her own window staring back at this tiny house she'd once called a fixer-upper for lost causes. Did she think I'd feel sorry? That I'd come crawling back if she just made the storm loud enough? Inside, Lane called to me. "They're on the line." "Who?" "Harper Foundation. They want you to headline next week's donor gala. Front page, your version only." I stepped back in, the warm light washing over me like a tide I'd finally learned to ride. "Tell them yes." "And the family?" I gave him the only answer that mattered. "They can wait outside." "Good," I said, feeling the glass sweat between my fingers. "Let them see the whole thing." ... The speeches dragged on. Old donors thanking each other for favors they'd traded for decades. Local officials gushing about partnerships that lined their pockets more than any poor families. I smiled when it was expected, sipped when I wanted to scream. Lane stood at the back wall, arms folded, eyes never leaving me for more than a second. Finally, my name. The MC's voice rose over the polite applause, each syllable stretched like a drumroll they didn't realize was pounding for their own funeral. I walked up the steps to the stage, my heels muffled by the velvet runner. The lights hit me like a punch, warm, blinding, yet I could still feel the cold spots in the crowd where my mother's people sat, their eyes hard, waiting for me to ruin myself. I gripped the podium, my palms didn't sweat, my knees didn't shake. Maybe I was just too tired to feel it, or maybe, finally, I'd run out of places to hide. ... "Thank you," I began, my voice stronger than I'd expected, echoing against the ballroom's gilded ceiling. "You've all been so generous tonight. Your donations, your promises, but I need to tell you the truth about what you're giving to." A ripple moved through the crowd. A waiter froze mid-pour. Somewhere in the back I heard Lane's low chuckle, so faint, only I would notice. He knew. He'd seen me write and rewrite this speech until the words scraped my bones clean. I took a breath, my fingers drumming on the polished wood. For years, the Windermere Children's Trust was a name you could say at cocktail parties to feel good about yourselves. It was a brand my family built and rotted from the inside out. Money that was supposed to buy textbooks bought country club memberships. Grants that were supposed to keep the heat on in foster homes paid for new cars instead. A gasp. A murmur. Someone near the front fumbled for their phone. I pressed on. "I know this because I paid for it. I paid with my silence when they made me wait outside my own home. I paid every time you toasted me for my generosity without asking why the girl you praised was standing in the rain. But I don't owe you that anymore." I saw my mother's lawyer near the side doors, eyes wide, jaw working soundlessly. He'd be drafting injunctions in his head before I stepped off this stage. Let him. The Windermere Trust is mine now. Every dirty dollar traced. Every rotten beam ripped out. If you want to give tonight, give knowing your money isn't hiding someone else's sin anymore. It's building something real. Something I wish I'd had when I was the kid standing outside your parties. The applause started small. I almost didn't hear it at first. A polite patter from the people who clapped for everything because it made them feel good. But then it spread, a surge, rising up the walls until it drowned out the static in my head. For a second, I let it touch me. I let it remind me that the girl who waited by the locked doors had built her own stage and filled the room herself. ... Afterward, they came in waves. Reporters. Donors. People I'd never spoken to before but who suddenly wanted to know if I'd sit on their boards, headline their galas, pose for their feel-good spreads. I nodded when it made sense, smiled when it didn't cost me anything. Lane kept his eyes on the exits, blocking anyone who came too close with the wrong kind of grin. And through it all, Through the hum of cameras and clinking glasses, I felt that emptiness again, not the same sharp ache as before. This one was cleaner, quieter. The space I'd cleared, waiting for me to decide what I wanted to build inside it. Dash dash dash, dot dot. Later, back at the house, Lane found me sitting by the cold hearth, still in the black dress, my hair half unpinned, the old silver clip lying heavy in my palm. "Good speech," he said, his voice soft in the hush. "They're still going to come for me," I said. Not a question, just the truth, laid bare like an old wound. He didn't argue. He just leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. Let them knock. I looked at him. The man who'd never made me feel like I had to stand in the rain for his approval. The one who'd handed me the umbrella but never pretended the storm wasn't real. "They can wait outside," I said again, my voice barely more than a whisper. Lane's smile was slow, certain. Good. They're going to hate that. And for once, for the first time, I didn't care. I didn't care. That was the part that scared me the most. How easy it felt once I said it out loud. Like the door I'd spent my whole life pounding on had never really mattered. Like it had always been made of paper, painted to look like iron, just waiting for me to push through it. Lane didn't say anything else. He just tipped his head once, that rare, small smile curving at the edge of his mouth, then turned and left me alone in the quiet. I sat there in my old brick house. My house, the silver hair clip warm in my palm, the fire dead in the grate, but the air around me alive with the pulse of what I'd done. Outside, the hedgerows shifted in the wind. They used to feel like prison walls. Now they felt like fences I'd outgrown. And beyond them, the windows of Windermere were still lit. I could almost see them from where I sat, a flicker of gold behind the tangled branches. I pictured my mother pacing the drawing room, Andrew on the phone with the last lawyer they hadn't fired yet, Graham pouring another drink to steady his trembling hands. I used to think that scene would taste like victory. But it didn't. It tasted like distance, like the gap between who I'd been and who I'd chosen to become. I don't remember falling asleep there on the rug, hair half pinned, shoes still on. But I remember the morning that came after, because it was the first time in my life that I woke up and didn't feel that snap of panic behind my ribs. I made coffee in the kitchen while Lane shuffled around, half-dressed, hair sticking up in the back like a wolf that hadn't yet remembered he was supposed to act tame. I poured him a mug and slid it across the table, same as he'd done for me 100 times before. "You did it," he said, eyes on the headlines already buzzing on his phone. "Marlowe Hart reclaims Windermere Trust. Millions redirected to local programs. Family remains silent on allegations." I stirred sugar into my mug, the spoon clinking softly. "No," I said. "I'm still doing it." He looked up at that. Really looked. "You're not finished then." I thought about the press calls waiting in my inbox, the interviews they wanted me to give, the gala invitations that would pour in, eager to show off the self-made heiress they'd once ignored. I thought about the charity workers I'd met in those cramped offices, people who'd stretched pennies to feed kids whose names my family only learned when the cameras were on. "No," I said again, my voice stronger now. "I'm not finished." Lane's mouth twitched into that small conspiratorial grin. "Good, because the world's going to keep knocking." I raised my mug, the cheap porcelain warm in my hands. "Let it. Dash, 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 dot dot." The weeks that followed were a storm I'd already prepared for. Graham and the old board tried to spin the press, but every lie they fed to the tabloids bounced off the clean new structure I'd built under their noses. Every fake invoice we leaked was another nail in the coffin of their reputation. And they knew it. My mother tried her last trick, a handwritten letter delivered by a driver too polite to look me in the eye. I read it standing by the window. Her script was still elegant, the same loops she'd used to sign my birthday cards when I was a child. "Marlowe, darling, let's stop this. Let's sit down. There's still time to come home. You're my daughter. This doesn't have to end like this." "My." I didn't respond. I didn't burn it either. I slid the letter into the box on my mantel, next to the broken key, the napkin from that first deal, the clipping of my first check. A reminder that home isn't a place with hedgerows and locked doors. It's the skin you live in when you stop asking for permission to exist. Dash, dash, dash. The day I signed the final restructure documents, the air felt heavy with summer. That strange, breathless heat that makes the garden smell like earth and old secrets. I walked the perimeter of my tiny garden barefoot, the stones warm under my heels. Lane watched me from the kitchen window, arms folded, phone pressed to his ear as he made my enemy's excuses die in the space between sentences. The papers sat on the weathered table under the big oak tree, the same tree I'd stood beneath the first night I bought this house, half drunk on cheap wine, telling myself I'd never belong anywhere until I built my own walls. No more walls now, just fences I'd leave unlocked. I signed my name, Marlo Hart. Not Asterix the disappointment, not Asterix the girl who ruins everything. Just Marlo Hart, the owner of the trust, the controller of the estate debt, the girl they'd left outside the gate, who now held the ground beneath their feet. Dash, 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 dot, dot. When the last paper was notarized, Lane poured 2 glasses of something gold and sharp. Not champagne, just whiskey, neat, the way we'd always drunk it when we knew there was still work to do. He held his glass up, the fading sun catching on the scars across his knuckles. "To the birthday girl," he said. "Late party's better than none." I laughed, the sound low, unguarded. "It's not a party if I'm the only one inside." Lane tipped his head toward the gate, the hedgerows shifting in the breeze like they'd heard him. "Anyone worth letting in?" I thought about that. All the faces that would come now. Fair-weather friends, fair-weather cousins. The press wanting their slice of my story. The people who'd once told me to keep quiet, to stop making trouble, to stand outside until they were ready to make me presentable. "No," I said, letting the word rest heavy on my tongue. "Not yet. Dash, 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 dot, dot." We sat there long after the sun dipped behind the fields, the world outside my small garden settling into the hush of late summer. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to run, to get on the jet, to disappear into another city where my name was only mine. I wanted to stay right here, where the walls were low and the locks were gone. Lane leaned back in his chair, feet propped on the edge of the table, his empty glass dangling from one big hand. So, what next? I looked at the gate again. Old iron hinges, wood gone soft from years of rain and wind. I'd always hated that gate. It looked too much like the one at Windermere, the one that slammed shut behind me more times than I could count. "I'm taking it down," I said. Lane raised an eyebrow. "The gate?" I nodded. "All of it. No more hedgerows either. If someone wants to find me, they'd better walk right up and look me in the eye." He let out a low, appreciative whistle. "That'll make the neighbors nervous." "Good," I said. "Let them knock." He held up his glass, the empty bottom catching the last scraps of dusk. "And if they don't?" I grinned. Wide, teeth bared, the kind of grin I'd once been told wasn't ladylike enough for family portraits. "Then they can wait outside." Dash, 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 dot, dot. I don't know what comes next. Not exactly. Maybe I keep building new programs, new investments that actually reach the kids my family pretended to care about. Maybe I buy the house next to Windermere, just to remind them the ground has always been mine. Maybe I fly to New York for a week and sleep through every call until the world realizes I don't jump just because they clap. What I do know is this: I won't be standing in the rain again waiting for someone else to open the door. If they want me, they come to my gate. And if they're worth it, I'll let them in. If they're not, they can wait outside, same as I did. And I promise you this: I won't be the one shivering this time. Dash, 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 dot, dot. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.